Hi guys, welcome back to another video, welcome back to another walk and talk, just out getting some exercise, picking up the camera and talking a little bit about cryptocurrency and what is going on in the space. Today's topic is going to be Bitcoin and just generally what's been happening with crypto over the last kind of 24 hours or so. As I get into today's video, if you do find it useful, informative, smash that like button, maybe even entertaining at times, smash that like button. If you're new, subscribe, don't forget to tap the bell, select all the notifications, and in doing so, you will not miss another video update. So let's talk about what's going on in crypto right now. So obviously we have seen a big pull to the downside. I say a big pull, it's actually quite reasonable. It's not overly too dramatic. But it has caused a bit of a spur of liquidations when it comes to cryptocurrencies. And if we just focus in on Bitcoin specifically, we can see $120 million of liquidations on Bitcoin in the last 24 hours. This is pretty sizable, but it's not unusual, right? When we see large pullbacks in the market, specifically like what we saw yesterday, then yeah, there's going to be some liquidations that occur. Now, the reason I'm talking about it today is not because it's an unusual number. 120 million isn't really a huge amount of liquidations when it comes to cryptocurrency assets. It is more to do with the fact that there's some unusual data around the exchanges that are liquidating positions, right? And so, I wanted to focus in today on a little bit of that. Let's see if we can get out of the sun here a little bit and start talking about what we've seen inside the data. This is the on-chain data that we have access, or members have access to, via membership.cheekycrypto.io. Okay, and this data basically pulls information in from many different sources and kind of analyzes it and gives you the kind of the data that you need to know about, right? And so when we taken a look at Bitcoin this morning, we could see that there were some liquidations that were quite irregular. Okay, now the irregular part, this is going to sound a little bit crazy and a little bit unusual. $120 million of liquidations in the last 24 hours. That's not the unusual part. The unusual part are the different level exchanges, right? And the exchanges that are liquidating positions. At the top of the list, we see OKX. Now, OKX, by most normal circumstances, is usually at the top of the list. Most recently, because of people kind of avoiding Binance and things like that, we've seen natural growth on the exchange OKX, right? So that's not the unusual part. The unusual part is that these other exchanges don't appear to have that many liquidations in comparison to OKX. Okay, so given the pullback that we've seen, $120 million is pretty normal, pretty standard, and something that you'd expect to see considering the way that Bitcoin moved yesterday, right? Stopped out a lot of long positions, right? Liquidating those long positions in favor of short positions. This isn't unusual. This is kind of what you would expect to see. And so 120 million is a reasonable number. It's very common. It isn't unusual. But what is unusual is that I think it was 83 million of the 83 million of the 120 million were OKX liquidations. Now, that's irregular. That means that essentially the majority of liquidations happened at the OKX exchange. And that's the irregular part. That's the part that is unusual and something that you wouldn't normally expect to see. That is not to say, though, that there's something funny going on at the OKX exchange. Instead, I think the other exchanges such as Binance, Kraken, Bybit, Bitrue and so forth maybe are not being as truthful as they should in terms of the liquidations that they're creating. Meaning that is that $120 million of liquidations actually the correct number? Because when you take a look at this data, one of two things is happening. Either OKX is basically liquidating more than the usual share of positions. OKX is either become so dominant in the space that it dwarfs that of Binance, Kraken, and Bybit and so forth. Or, alternatively, the other exchanges are not being truthful about the amount of money that they're liquidating in the market. And therefore, when we pull all the API data, it makes it look like OKX is a really bad exchange, which I don't think it is. Now, for reference here and for kind of context on this, the liquidation data is what helped us spot FTX ahead of the FTX crash. Why we were talking to our community about exiting our positions on FTX, getting our assets off and shorting FTT and Solana and so forth ahead of anybody else in the space. And it was all coming down to the liquidation data, because they were doing liquidations of around 850 million in a single 24-hour period. Very irregular data that basically made us dive deeper into what was going on at FTX, right? Now, when we take a look at OKX in relation to these most recent movements, I'm not seeing any real major areas of concern here. So I think the concern really is on the other exchanges maybe not being as truthful with their API-based data, or there's an API issue that we're not pulling the correct, liquidation data from those other exchanges. But I thought it was worth kind of noting and kind of talking about in today's video, because, by all stretch of the imagination, if you're just glancing at the data, you would be inclined to think that maybe there's a problem with the OKX exchange, and maybe that you want to kind of get off the platform. And if there was a problem, I would definitely be telling you about it. I don't think there is. I think the problem is actually more to do with these other exchanges maybe not having the correct data contained within their API pools, and therefore the data that's being presented to us is not as accurate. And guys, you can let me know in the comments below what you think is going on there when it comes to OKX, and what you think is going on with the liquidations. 120 million in 24 hours, considering a pullback that we saw for Bitcoin, I don't think is anything to be too concerned with. Now, getting back to the other subject of today's video, which will be, what is going on with the price action. I still see the potential surge upwards for Bitcoin's price action. I don't think we're necessarily done just yet. I think we're getting close, but we're not there overall. I think that we will be seeing another resurgence to the upside. Might take a little bit of time, a few days or so, a week maybe, but I still see the potential move upwards towards the $40,000 level. I don't think that has changed any. I still think we are on track for that. There are some bearish structures appearing though on the hourly charts and the smaller time frames, and of course the bearish structures on the weekly and monthly still sit there. But for the most part, I'm thinking the medium term, we're still looking pretty good for Bitcoin's price action. We are still looking at moving the price of Bitcoin up towards that $40,000. I don't think that has really changed all that much. Now, in terms of altcoins, well, there's still some pretty decent growth in things like Solana, in Chainlink. I still see plenty of growth in all of those assets as well, so a lot of that hasn't changed. So for the most part, I think it's business as usual for the next few days, maybe a week or so, before we actually start to see a proper corrective structure and a proper correction to the downside, because I do think we are likely to see that. Now, in terms of the market, it's kind of being spooked out a little bit. I'd be interested to kind of see what happens next, but for me, I think we do have some interesting kind of growth potential in the assets across the board. Obviously, Bitcoin spot ETFs kind of coming soon, soonish, I guess. They got a bit approved. Approvals are one thing. Once we have approvals, we'll obviously have to see, how long it takes for things to kind of get actually put into action. That's going to be a totally different argument altogether, and that's going to take some time. I would have thought, we're probably looking at the end of Q2, beginning of Q3, before we actually see a Bitcoin spot ETF actually go live. Okay, so we have to kind of consider that. But approvals, I think that's going to fuel a little bit of speculation, but it's going to ultimately end in a sell the news event. We obviously do have as well a Fed pivot, basically a turn or a rate cut hike. Rate cut, that's probably the better way of saying it, not a hike, a cut. And that's going to basically fuel a bit of a move for basically most assets, right? We're going to see the stock market come on down a bit, 50% or so, and I do expect Bitcoin and other assets to kind of go down very similar levels as well, right? So we'll have that. That's going to basically help fuel this natural correction to the downside, along with a potential sell the news after Bitcoin spot ETF approval or multiple approvals. And when we'll get back into the bullish news, right, back into 2024, when we have a Bitcoin halving event and these Bitcoin spot ETFs actually launching. So overall, I think we're right on track. We're right where we need to be. But it's interesting to kind of see the developments day by day. as they go. But guys, I think that's going to wrap up today's video. If you have found it useful and informative, smash that like button. I do appreciate that. If you are new to the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe, tap the bell, select all the notifications, and in doing so, you will be kept up to date with everything that we do here at Cheeky Crypto. Until the next one, have a fantastic day.